you're right when you say that this was a very different book from any other book I have ever written over the last 35 years. The enemy beside me was probably the most difficult, the most heartbreaking, and the most infuriating, and I think no doubt the most important. It's about a very unlikely subject, the Holocaust in Lithuania. Um, why did I choose to focus on that? Because Lithuania killed a higher percentage of Jews than any other country in Europe, including Nazi Germany. I don't know if you know that. And they did it before the Germans even arrived. But more importantly, today, Lithuania is the leading proponent of Holocaust distortion in Europe, honoring the perpetrators, dishonoring the mass graves, and seeking to erase its crimes, along with 80 years of Holocaust education in Europe. As much of all of us would like to put the terrible chapter of our history behind us, we cannot remain deaf and blind to this horrendous situation, which dishonors our dead and miseducates the living. As free Jews, treating Lithuania and countries guilty of similar crimes like Poland, Latvia, and the Ukraine like modern, enlightened Europeans, bestowing upon them a status they have not earned and do not deserve. And this must be stopped. The time has come to take a united stand against such stupendous evil. Writing about the Holocaust had been something I felt obligated to do for decades. In fact, about 20 years ago, I actually tried. I knew exactly what my book was going to be about. The experiences of my mother-in-law, all those stories she told me under flickering Shabbat candles in the hushed quiet of Friday night as we both waited for our husbands to come home from shul. How it had been for her, a girl of 14, when the Nazis showed up in Ungvar, a town in the Carpathian Mountains, beating her mentally challenged brother almost to death when he dared to ask questions. The overcrowded brick factory where thousands waited for the cattle cars, the final moments at the gates of Auschwitz, where she caught the last glimpses of her parents, her grandmother and brothers, and then, more slowly, over many, many Friday nights, how she and her two sisters and friends had managed against all odds to survive. The trade-offs for crumbs, the imaginary meals they cooked to keep from going mad with hunger. With my father-in-law, it was really more complicated. He was forcibly drafted into the Jewish slave labor force, serving the deeply anti-Semitic Hungarian army. They had rounded up his young wife and small children and gassed them in Auschwitz while he was imprisoned. It was a story he couldn't talk about. Even my husband only found out about his father's first family when he was 18 years old, when his father suddenly thrust an old photo of a pretty dark-haired woman, a handsome little boy, and a curly-haired little girl into his hands. It was traumatizing. Until I read Robert Rosette's book, Conscripted Slaves. Robert Rosette, by the way, is the chief librarian at Yad Vashem in Israel. And he wrote a book called Conscripted Slaves because his father had been also in the slave labor camps. And honestly, I had no idea that my father-in-law's survival had been such a miracle until I read that book. Pushed into the front lines in the dead of winter without any proper clothing or even shoes. They were starved, they were brutalized, even outright murdered by the Hungarian superiors. He was one of 45,000 Jewish men suffering from the spring of 1942 until the summer of 1944. 80% never went home. Against all odds, my father-in-law had gone home. I just couldn't imagine how. How it had it been really any other topic, I would have used my imagination. I would have made things up. I know that there are authors of Holocaust novels out there that do exactly that, playing fast and loose with the truth like the tattooist of Auschwitz. That seems to me a travesty because there are still so many doubters, so much misinformation, and most of all because there are so many true stories that have yet to be told. Why make up a story? To me, our people's experiences in the Holocaust are sacred and they need to be related with scrupulous honesty. So I let the book idea go, thinking that maybe one day I asked my father-in-law all the questions I had, but know, that day never came. Sometimes I kick myself for not pressing both of them for more information when I had the chance, and other times I admit that I couldn't have done anything else because I loved them. I They told us what they wanted to tell us, and for the rest of it, who was I to force them to go through the trauma of reliving that nightmare for my sake, no matter how noble my intentions? Their silence was their choice and had to be respected. And so I put aside all my index cards and I went on to other projects. That didn't mean I stopped searching for answers. Despite being far removed physically from the Holocaust, as the child of an American mother and a father who had reached the United States with his whole family from the Ukraine by 1915, it had nevertheless been an important part of my life from the beginning. I remember the first time I heard the word Auschwitz. It burst into our living room from the pioneering new appliance of flickering black and white images very few of our neighbors owned. We had one of the first TVs. I was about 6 years old and I was living in Rockaway Beach, a block from the Atlantic Ocean and about an hour and a half subway ride into Manhattan. And when I went into the living room to investigate further, my mother was horrified and she threw me out. She said, "No, no, no, go back to your bedroom." And that was that. But what she couldn't have known, of course, was that although I couldn't see the images, I was able to hear almost every single word. Much of it I didn't understand. But ironically, all those years later, after having seen so many films and read so many memoirs and books of history about the Holocaust, I actually feel almost as ignorant as I did back then. And I'm not alone. The Holocaust, says author and scholar Melvin Julius Bouquet, is a black hole that devours light. The more illumination you cast on it, the less you see. He also wrote, "No one can understand how we can hold collectively guilty not only the octogenarian perpetrators, but the rest of the nation that saw nothing for the 12-year reign of the Thousand-Year Reich, and why we can hold guilty their children and their grandchildren and the yet unborn tainted by their German blood," wrote Bouquet in the preface to his really remarkable collection of second-generation Holocaust writings called Nothing Makes You Free. He goes on to say, "Because the pure flame of undying hatred is wrong, doesn't mean that it isn't true. And if this reflects a deep flaw in my soul, so be it. They put it there." And then 3 years ago, during COVID, I happened to meet an old friend walking down a nearly deserted street in Jerusalem, Dr. Ephraim Zorov, who's head of Israel's Weisenthal Center and a renowned Nazi hunter. We stopped briefly to chat, and in those few moments, he related some information that was so shocking that it really upended everything that I thought I knew. He had co-authored a nonfiction book titled Our People, in which he detailed the almost unknown story of how local Lithuanian farmers, butchers, policemen had savagely and sadistically murdered and looted almost every Jewish man, woman, and child in the country. Over 96% of their 600-year-old Jewish community, the Litvaks. Traveling around Lithuania, gathering information from local people, he had joined up with a best-selling Lithuanian author, Ruta Vinagata, to produce a remarkable historical document. Then he told me this. He, who had spent his life seeking justice for Holocaust victims, whose namesake had been killed by Lithuanian perpetrators collaborating with the Nazis, had nevertheless managed to develop a friendship with this Lithuanian woman, probably the offspring of perpetrators, a friendship which had deepened into love. He had gone through a divorce and they were thinking of getting married. I was flabbergasted. Well, Germans had shipped off their Jews, putting their torture and murder into the hands of strangers, far from prying eyes. And even Himmler had expressed reservations about murdering German Jews. In Lithuania, there had been no such niceties, something like what happened just now in Israel. Not only weren't they ashamed of it, they put on, those GoPro head things to record every single thing they did. They sent it out on Facebook. Well, the Lithuanians were very similar. I came across, while I was doing this book, the first person testimonies of survivors collected by Lev Kornichowski, who was himself a survivor of the Lithuanian Holocaust. And in this book, these testimonies confirm in chilling detail, almost too horrible to read, all the things that happened there in every single little town and village. It's called The Lithuanian Slaughter of Its Jews. People who committed these murders and rapes and looting did it with shameless abandon, holding public parties to devote, they were giving out the spoils. They made a party out of it. Nothing was too small for them to give out. Not a pair of underwear or a teaspoon. As survivors testified, even the Nazis who witnessed this behavior expressed disgust. I imagine the example set by the Lithuanians must have inspired Hitler so that 6 months later, on January 20th, 1942, he and his henchmen held the Wannsee Conference, adopting mass murder of the Jewish people as the official Nazi policy, apparently now convinced killing every Jew in Europe would be a walk in the park. Ironically, years before I knew any of these things, I had visited Vilnius. I was researching a book about the first woman Hebrew novelist, a Lithuanian named Sarah Foner. Surrounded by Jewish heritage tourists eager to visit ancestral villages, I experienced a real shock when our kippah-wearing group tried to buy soft drinks in a local kiosk after we visited a large, imposing, abandoned synagogue in what was obviously once a thriving Jewish community. We were treated like lepers. Later, as I sat on a bench in a leafy park opposite Vilnius's Jewish quarter, I watched in horror as a white marble gravestone rose up out of the earth after the rain, revealing that the entire park had been set over a cemetery. Even more upsetting was the priceless Jewish landmarks like the great synagogue Schulhof complex had disappeared completely, callously destroyed by the Soviets who put up ugly housing complexes and parking lots. After gaining independence, Lithuanians had done absolutely nothing to restore and commemorate these sites, continuing to pave over and build anew, only stopped by the most extreme public outcries, like that against a new convention center poised to be built over the Jewish cemetery. And yet, Dr. Zora's personal story, revealed to me in the middle of a Jerusalem street, was one that really flew in the face of unending hatred, revealing forgiveness, reconciliation, even love was possible, even for someone like himself, who had dedicated his life to finding justice for the victims. I was startled, and I was actually inspired by his example, and I was incredibly moved by the collaboration of Zorov and Vinogata in bravely bringing this unpopular truth of Lithuania's Holocaust crimes, so long denied and distorted by their official government agencies, to popular recognition. Ruta is a very special person. She was a best-selling Lithuanian author, and she wrote about things like, life changes for middle-aged women, nothing to do with politics. But when she collaborated with Ephraim Zorov on this book, she became an absolute pariah. She was dumped by her editor, her agent, and her publishing house. Her popular books were snatched off the shelves of bookstores, and her livelihood was gone. On occasion, she even faced physical threats. Today, Ruta sends us Facebook messages from her new home in Spain. She has burnt her bridges, and I think that was remarkable. She did it out of the love of truth and her own special kind of patriotism, the desire to make her country a place her children can be proud of. As an author, I was shocked and moved to tears by Ephraim and Ruth's story. It was so brave, it was so remarkable, so uplifting, so heartbreaking, but most importantly, has the kind of complexity that only a full-length novel can properly explore. For not only is it about irredeemable evil, but also about penitence, about remorse, forgiveness, reconciliation, and also love. What separates it from almost every other novel out there about the Holocaust is that it isn't only historical, it's contemporary. It's about our generation, a subject really touched upon in Holocaust literature, with the bonus of being a love story with deeply sympathetic protagonists whose relationship faces unbelievable challenges and obstacles, people you care about and who you want to succeed despite impossible odds. And so I created the characters of Israeli Nazi hunter Milja Gottstein-Lasker and Lithuanian professor Darius Vidas. When Darius invites Milja to take part in a Holocaust education project in Lithuania, she's skeptical about his sincerity given his country's history. She decides to come anyway because of her own secret agenda. She is planning to circumvent official Lithuanian channels, using her platform to reveal to Lithuanian high school students the truth they have been denied concerning the true history of what took place in their own hometowns. Dr. Vidas is aware that he is putting his successful career in jeopardy by inviting Milja, a controversial Nazi hunter and well-known critic of Lithuania, but believing himself to be the grandchild of a Lithuanian mayor who saved a Jewish family now living in America, he feels he can change her mind about the country and about its culpability. Little does he realize that Milja's true agenda is going to get him into a lot of hot water, and that he's putting himself and his academic career on the line and also placing the rest of his family into the crosshairs of Lithuanian government officials who at all costs are determined to distort Lithuanian Holocaust history and bury its participation in mass murder. Both Milja and Darius are in their late 40s with grown children and complicated personal lives. Both are passionately interested in truth. Milja and Darius's journey, like much, I think, very similar to Zoroff and Vinayeta's, begins with antagonism and irreconcilable differences. But the more they learn about each other in the past, the more the distance between them shrinks until they find themselves joining together to battle forces that threaten them both, along with everything they love, they believe in, and hope to accomplish. What I, as a novelist, particularly wanted to explore The Enemy Beside Me was how the characters crossed the abyss which still divides our generation and our children and grandchildren's. So many in the world today, Jew and non-Jew, struggle with the horrors that are the legacy of our history. What pioneering roadmap did Ephraim and Ruth's story create that we can follow, allowing us to go in their footsteps to reach true reconciliation and even love without betraying our loyalty to the victims or the love of our birthplaces? What balm could be applied to the terrible wound inflicted on human decency by the Nazis and their collaborators, a wound which still festers today, dividing people, make it impossible for us to move on now and for the foreseeable future? For those of us who had not been there, had not participated, and whose suffering and culpability were bitter legacies passed down to us as history and cultural heritage, what was the way forward? I didn't know. And as a writer, I have found that the best way to figure out what you think about any question is to write a book about it. And so I began my work on The Enemy Beside Me. At the start, I thought that the way to begin would be to research the Holocaust in Lithuania. But after much unbearable plowing through book after book on this subject, I began to understand that what stands in the way of reconciliation between Jew and non-Jew is not the past, but the present. Crimes being committed today by official government bodies in Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, and the Ukraine. Because of my meeting with Dr. Zoroff, I decided to concentrate on Lithuania, where virulent right-wing nationalist forces continue to protest and deny the well-documented historical facts about the responsibility of the Lithuanian people for the mass murder of almost the entire Jewish community. Today, they are so interested in keeping up this self deception that despite not being a wealthy country, they pour huge amounts of money that they cannot afford into maintaining state sponsored institutions whose sole purpose is Holocaust fixing, hiding and distorting shameful historical truths from the world, especially from their own children. For example, their Genocide and Resistance Research Center, which only researches Soviet crimes against Lithuanians, the Center for Historical Truth, or the Red Brown Commission, whose mission is to make Lithuanian suffering under Stalin equivalent to the crimes of the Holocaust. The outrageously named Genocide Museum, which has not a single exhibit on the Holocaust. So loud was the outcry against that egregious affront that the museum recently underwent a reluctant name change to Museum of Occupations and Freedom Fights. Not exactly mellifluous, but better than calling it Holocaust Museum. They consider what happened to them under the Soviets a Holocaust. Well, they were not mass murdered. They were not deported and gassed. Their businesses were taken away. Some of them were deported. I'm not saying they didn't suffer, but so hell-bent is the Lithuanian government in accomplishing this massive fraud that they're willing to destroy decades of Holocaust education in Europe by promoting their double genocide theory, which ridiculously equates the systematic industrialized mass murder of Europe's Jews to the confiscation of businesses and the deportations of Soviet communists. As I wrote in my book, it wasn't us, the Lithuanian officials told whoever was listening. It was the Germans. It wasn't us. It was the communists. It wasn't us. It was just a few bad apples. And besides, haven't we also suffered? Didn't the communists, many of them Jews, they'll tell you, take away our farms and our businesses? Didn't they execute our partisans? Exile us to Siberia in the thousands where we starved and died? Why? It was exactly the same as the Holocaust, they'll tell you. And now they declare we're even. As part of the EU, Lithuania is in a position to influence all of Europe with its Holocaust distortions, and this is very serious business indeed. Equating the crimes of the communists to the final solution almost became official EU policy in 2008 with the Prague Declaration, which went under the radar for most Jewish organizations who continue to happily send representatives to Lithuania to be honored, to get medals for not rocking the boat. And today they do the same. There are many Jewish organizations that are very chummy with the Lithuanians. And I have to say, Israel is not really much better in this. They really don't hold them to account for what they're doing instead of demanding change. Luckily, some Jews were not sleeping. Ephraim Zoroff was an outspoken critic, and Vilnius-based Jewish author, scholar, and educator David Katz, who was once a professor of Yiddish in Vilnius University, before they fired him for his activism, he helped to put together a 70 years declaration, and he gathered the signatures of 70 EU parliamentarians who categorically rejected attempts, quote, to obfuscate the Holocaust by diminishing its uniqueness and deeming it to be equal, similar, or equivalent to communism. Lithuania's Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time was absolutely outraged by this. He called it deplorable and pathetic. And he said, quote, "It's not possible to find differences between Hitler and Stalin except in their mustaches. Hitler's was shorter." Crime number two, standing in the way of reconciliation and forgiveness today, is the hero worship of so-called partisans who opposed the communists but were also mass murderers of Jews, like Jonas Noriega, whose own granddaughter, Sylvia Foti, recently denounced him in her book, My Grandfather the Nazi. But this hero worship of murderous anti-Semites isn't limited to Noriega. Bestowal of state awards to perpetrators like J. Christoponis and A. Baltusis, the naming of streets and schools not only after Noriega, but also Nazi collaborator Case Skripa. And let's not forget to mention the government-funded reburial of the head of the 1941 Nazi collaborationist government, who initiated the persecution of Jews, not merely by promulgating its infamous statutes on the position of Jews, but by paying the salaries of thousands of executioners who shot Jews at Kaunas's seventh fort. In 2018, to celebrate Vilnius's 100th birthday, hundreds marched through the streets with banners reading, "We know who our heroes are," with images of partisan Jew killers. Crime number 3 of Lithuania is their refusal to try war criminals. Although thousands of Lithuanians took part in the murder of their neighbors, not one was tried, convicted, or jailed. Indeed, when 15 Lithuanians were deported from the United States for war crimes, and they dusted off their Lithuanian passports and headed to Vilnius, instead of embracing this as an opportunity for a national catharsis to educate a new generation to the mistakes of the past and disassociate themselves, the independent Lithuania, from these criminals and their crimes, instead they embraced these criminals, encouraging popular sentiment to vilify and deplore those persecuting these, quote, poor old men, and using their justice system to slow down the trials until these mass murderers died unpunished of old age. On the other hand, the Lithuanian prosecutor general showed no such reluctance in energetically pursuing Jewish anti-Nazi resistance fighters, including the former head of Yad Vashem, Yitzhak Arad. They wanted to arrest him for his crimes. As in 2008, Sarah Gennati, who was a native of Kaunas, who escaped into the forest and joined the anti-Nazi fighters, and was also somebody they were looking to arrest, she wrote, "Jews did not join the anti-Nazi partisans as a normal act of choice. We were forced to fight the Lithuanian Nazis to save ourselves from extermination. We took the gun in our hands in a desperate situation when our parents, our brothers and sisters were murdered, when children were grabbed from their mothers and sent to the gruesome deaths. We fought in order to survive. We fought against fascism, which was our enemy, the enemy of all democracies, and the enemy of Lithuania." Crime number 4, reparations. The value of Jewish property in pre-war Lithuania has never been calculated. The public religious buildings alone were estimated to be worth $155 million. The compensation law for public property of 2011 set aside only $53 million to be paid out over 10 years. It's unclear who, if anybody, got this money. Nothing was allocated for the compensation of private property until last year, when Lithuania passed a law to set aside $38 million for private claims. This has been hailed with great enthusiasm, particularly by Jewish organizations, even though it's a pittance. However, we have yet to see if bureaucratic measures that made it impossible in the past for the descendants of Lithuanian Jewish victims to apply for compensation will be overcome. They had demanded in the past such thing as proof of citizenship, which is almost impossible to acquire based on heritage. So let's not pop any champagne corks just yet. Crime number 5, commemoration. There are 227 mass murder sites in Lithuania. Many, if not most, are unmarked and difficult to find. And even those that have special markers, like the 9th Fort in Kaunas, where 50,000 Jews were murdered, project unclear messages that leave visitors picnicking and frolicking and having weddings, oblivious of its horrific history. Most sites remain unmarked at all, and an unmarked site is history paved over and forgotten, the voices of the victims forever stilled. While The Enemy Beside Me contains historical material, it is not a book of history. It's not even a historical novel. For the first time, I try to define what it means to be part of this new narrative, what we need to do to honor the victims of the Holocaust and prevent the lingering hatefulness of the perpetrator's ideology from gaining momentum and exerting its power ever again. And I don't have to tell all of you that this is more important now than ever. In this book, I face the difficult question of what the post-Holocaust relationship should be between the children of victims and those of the perpetrators. Can we, should we, automatically hate entire generations of innocent people born long after these crimes took place? But on the other hand, should we raise our hands in defeat and simply acquiesce to the comfortable virtue signaling notion that we should forgive and forget because it happened so long ago. Many, perhaps most, would like to do just that. Many have even tried. But 80 years later, it still hangs over us like pollution, a cloud that often obscures the reality of our present. Well, I thought when I wrote this a while back, safe, joyous lives as Jews. And I hope one day it will be again, that this will again be true in Israel, and it will be true all over the world. At some point, don't all of us stand like Jews of Israel during that moment of silence when the siren sounds on Holocaust Remembrance Day, reflecting on the unthinkable tragedy and evil that happened to those we love, our people, trying to get our heads around it, as we in Israel now try to get our heads around what was done on October 7th. Like it or not, it is part of our lives, and no doubt part of the heritage we will pass down to our children and grandchildren. I haven't done a survey, but from my personal experience today, decades after I first wanted to write about the Holocaust, such books, as well as movies and television shows and documentaries, are more numerous than ever and show no sign of slowing down, quite the opposite. Why would that be? And this is the conclusion I've reached. Despite being arguably the worst crime in human history, the perpetrators basically got away with it. Except for a handful of Nazi criminals who got hung after the Nuremberg trials, the great majority were no better and arguably much worse of those that were tried in Nuremberg, who planned and executed the final solution, got off, if not completely scot-free, then with a slap on the wrist. That fact just doesn't sit right with intelligent, educated people, not only Jews, young people, especially those who are so concerned with social justice, with overcoming racism and prejudice, find it almost impossible to come to terms with these facts. And so the search for answers goes on, getting stronger instead of weaker. People writing more books, making more films, trying to understand. With all these important issues still standing between us, do I believe that reconciliation is still possible? That is what this book is really about. And in short, the answer is yes. I'd like to read you a short conversation between Milia and Darius, which encapsulates all my thoughts on this subject. So tell me, honestly, is it possible to make amends, or is it a lost cause? Is the hatred between our people so deep, so ingrained that all this, he waved his hand, is a waste of time? I don't know, she finally whispered, shaking her head. Maybe it is a waste of time. So you want to turn the car around and call the whole thing off? I'll get you a flight out tonight. She stared at him, and then she saw it, a sunbeam glinting off the moisture in his eyes as 2 tears fell down his cheeks. She felt a sudden sense of deep shame. From the beginning, he had come to her with an open heart, while hers had been resolutely locked against him, against this whole enterprise. No, I don't want to do that. So what is it you do want, Milya? She was a Jew, a descendant of Holocaust victims and survivors, people who had been marked for extermination and left to suffer the unspeakable amid a suddenly uncivilized world whose humanity developed slowly over centuries through religion and education had abruptly and inexplicably disappeared overnight. That sound familiar? But she herself had not suffered. She had been born into freedom and prosperity, and most of all, her own country. Her generation turning back the clock, making Jerusalem the capital of the Jewish people once more. Her position was one of strength, she told herself. She could now take her rightful place among the good, civilized people of the world, reaching across age-old barriers to heal old wounds, to create a new world, a better world. With people like Darius on the other side of the divide, it suddenly seemed possible. What I want, she said slowly, is to change the world so that what happened then can never happen again. That's what I want too, he said, exactly that. Are there enough of us to matter? What, enough people like us on both sides of the divide? People who admit what happened in all its truth, people of goodwill who care desperately enough to create that new world. I don't know, he admitted, but if there aren't, we need to create them. That is what we are doing, Milia, you and I, attempting to create that new world by transforming both our people, one by one by one. It is difficult, if not impossible, to write about things no one really understands, crimes for which the normal imagination halts at the threshold, holding back before entering, not wanting to believe. That is how we in Israel feel now. When we look at all of the things that are coming through about October 7th, we can't believe this actually happened. And yet, the more we hold back, the more the voices of the victims fade, become unclear, indistinct, until they finally lapse into silence. If we allow that to happen, then the voices of the enemies still beside us will ramp up in volume. Isn't that the truth? Distorting the historical facts of the greatest crime in history beyond recognition. And we can all see today how that happens. They have already begun their cacophony, rewriting history to obfuscate, excuse, distort, lull us into acceptance. What they want us to believe is that it wasn't so bad. But such things happen in all wars, and all the people of the world suffered equally, or perhaps even more. What they want us to do is forget there ever was a Holocaust. This, all good people of the world must not allow. Those people of goodwill, people like Ruta Vanagata and Sylvia Foti, and many good Lithuanians who are standing beside us, shoulder to shoulder in this battle, are our friends, whatever their parents and grandparents did and did not do. And I will say, this is true of many Arabs in Israel who are standing beside us, the Druze community, which is standing beside us, the Bedouin soldiers who are standing beside us, the Christian Arabs in Israel who are standing beside us. While Milia Gottstein Lasker and Darius Vidas are both fictional characters, their spirits are real, and they live on in all people whose histories have made them enemies, burdened by crimes committed before they were born. While historical truths cannot be ignored or overlooked and should never be distorted or denied, it is up to the living to make peace with one another. We must never be deaf to the voices of our dead, and yet we must also be open to the living hands reaching out in friendship and a sincere desire to make amends. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Is this on? Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. Thank you very much. Pretty sobering. And just so people know the numbers, there were 220,000 Lithuanian Jews in June of 1941. And by the end of 1941, 6 months later, there were 10,000. All of the rest were massacred in mass killings, mostly at the hands of the Lithuanian partisans. There were only, I think it was 1,000 Nazis in the entire Lithuania area. So they certainly did not, were not capable of killing as many, 210,000 Jews. So it was at the hands of the Lithuanian partisans for the most part, who became kind of mob mentality, savagery, barbarianism, much like we witnessed on October 7 with the Hamas coming in and mass murdering innocent civilians. It was very interesting. I like the perspective rather than going through the Holocaust denial issues and all that. It was really what you called Holocaust distortion, where Lithuania has been complicit in just distorting the facts, like you said. Pardon me?
Lithuania.
Yeah. So, does anyone have any questions? I don't want to be the sole person here, but the book was really well done. It was very, gut wrenching. I'm sure it was very difficult to research, but it's important. These things are important for all of us to know. I would imagine that most people did really understand the magnitude of what happened in Lithuania and how it happened. You know, we read a lot of books about Poland and the other Eastern European countries, and I knew Lithuania was part of that, but I really had no idea that there was so much savagery at the hands of Lithuanian citizens. So just
Very
shows
much
you what
like
can happen.
people to forget that. They would very much like people, and they especially would like Jews to forget that because they have a big tourist call to Jews. They're calling Vilnius the Jerusalem of the East, and they are making all kinds of things for Jews to come and visit Lithuania. They want your tourist dollars. They want you to be heritage tourists. Don't go. Don't give them 2 cents until they change what they're doing, until they commemorate these mass graves instead of leaving it like a garbage dump, instead of admitting to their children what they did. Do not go to Lithuania. Don't fall into that trap. I wouldn't give them 2 cents of my tourist dollars. And I'll tell you
Yeah.
something else. I'm not in favor of going to Poland either. And all of these trips to see Auschwitz and everything, it's a lot of money for Poland. And I never allowed my children to make these trips. And I'm glad that I didn't let them go because you can read all about it. You don't need to go to Poland to know what happened over there. And I think they benefit too much financially from all of these people going to Poland. I know it's a controversial stand, and the Israeli government doesn't agree with me. And there are many Jews who feel it's very empowering to go there and to say, here we are, Jews, we're still alive, and we survived and everything. And I say, come to Israel and say it in Jerusalem. Send them an email.
Yeah, it's good point. So I have a fluff question for you. If you were to write if you were to write an epilogue in 2 to 5 years from the end, where do you see Amelia? Where do you see her, and who do you see her with, if anyone?
Oh, wow. I
Yeah,
really,
come on, give us the
really
scoop.
don't like to write sequels. And I'll tell you why. Because when you write a book, what you do is create spaces for the imagination of the reader to go inside. So everybody is reading a different book.
Right.
And when I leave the ending of a book open like that, when I say, there were a lot of loose ends, and when she's closing that box, and I say there were a lot of strings, and there was a lot of loose ends, that was a metaphor for how I wanted the ending to go. Is Milia going to wind up with Darius the way Dr. Zora fell in love with Ruta? Their relationship didn't last, by the way. They split up. It was she's a lovely woman, but it was very hard for her to convert to become Jew. I think the Israelis were not very helpful to her in that. They don't like people to convert to Judaism because they want to marry a Jew. And the minute they found out that, the rabbinical court wasn't going to convert her. So he's an Orthodox Jew. He wasn't going to marry her if she wasn't Jewish. So she left. He remarried, and she's somewhere else. But I think there's still a lot of affection between the two of them. Um, will she wind up with Darius Vydas, the Lithuanian? Is she going back to her husband, who treated her? And I don't want to ruin the book for you, but she had a lot of things that she had to be reconciled to before she could go back to live with her husband after what he pulled on her. So I don't know. I honestly don't know. And I wouldn't want to tell you that. I think every single one who reads the book should have your own ending. I wish it on you that
Yeah,
you decide what the perfect ending is for that book.
yeah. I really struggled with it because, you set up the perfect tension. The husband betrayed her,
Oh,
and
don't say it.
well,
No,
okay,
that's a
okay.
spoiler.
He was
That's a
he was a
spoiler.
he was not the best husband in the world, shall we say? You know, Darius has obvious, there's obvious issues with regard to being able to insurmountable, maybe insurmountable, but they had a lot of soul, for one another. So yeah, I've thought a lot about them in the
I
in
think
the
it's an
recent
intriguing
weeks.
love story. I think it's a very intriguing love.
I
Aside
do
from the
too.
whole, outside the Holocaust, completely having nothing to do with the Holocaust, the relationship between these two characters, this, you know, um, this woman who's already got grandchildren, and he's already got grandchildren, and they meet each other and a very difficult point in both their lives. They're both split from their partners, and I think it's a very interesting story on that level also. And I think it keeps people um, keep people going, even if it had nothing to do with the Holocaust. It would be a very interesting story, just of these two people from opposite ends getting to know each other. So yeah, I think it's an important story.
Just the intersection of life, generations out from the Holocaust, how it still haunted both of them. I think that's why things were so insurmountable, because they both were haunted by the Holocaust in different ways. So yeah, there was that tension, and it was really well done. I really enjoyed it. Does anybody have any questions before we let Naomi probably go to sleep or relax? It's late there.
Yes, I'm happy to
Oh,
answer it.
hold on.
A couple years ago, I saw Sylvia Foti speak at a congregation here about her book. She's the one who discovered that her grandfather was a celebrated hero in Lithuania, and turned out that he committed atrocities. And she felt she had to learn the truth, and she got a lot of pushback, not only from her family but from the government. And so when you mentioned her name, I remembered, oh yeah, I heard her. And
I
yeah.
actually met Sylvia here in Israel. She came to give a talk at the organization of Lithuanian Jews, and I went to talk to her, and I read her book, and I thought she was very brave. I really did. It's not easy to go against your people, the narrative in the country, but she's done an amazingly important thing, and I give her tremendous credit for it.
Yeah, I'm going to try to see if I can. Is her book readily available still? Because if it is, I want to read it.
Claudia Cody's book is definitely available, but I
Okay.
don't think they call it My Grandfather the
Yeah.
Nazi. It's changed its name, but if you look up
Yeah,
Sylvia Foti,
I know the name of it, but I have it written down. I'm going to look it up, and I'll let everyone know, because that's a very brave step for her to take.
and
My
also I highly
grand
recommend a nonfiction book by Dr. Zurov called Our People. That's the book he wrote with Sylvia Foti, which I found I could not put down. It was a fascinating book, and it really was the book that inspired me to want to write my novel, reading his book Our People. So if you get a chance to read that, that's a good idea too.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions, comments? Okay, hold on.
Hi, Naomi. This isn't to do with the book specifically at all, but the situation in Israel. I just wondered if you, since I respect so much your insights and intelligence, and living in Israel, just if you could just give us some ideas on how to deal with people, sometimes even in your own family, who seem to have such sympathy for the Palestinians, and then making them, make Israel the bad guy, and the powerful nation, and the Palestinians the underdog, and all that. And if you had any advice for us how to talk to these people who, seem impossible to, change their opinions.
I think, right now the Jewish people are surrounded by neo-Nazis, and it's not only in Israel being surrounded by Hamas terrorists and PLO terrorists and Hezbollah. You look at what's going on in Europe. You look at the demonstrations in New York. You look at the demonstrations of the hundreds of thousands of people marching in London and in Paris, and you think to yourself, now I understand what happened during the Holocaust. Now I understand. I didn't understand before what happened. And years ago I said this, and I honestly believed it was true. Years ago I said, you know, you think the people who were killed in the Holocaust, they were stupider than we are? They weren't as cultured as we are. They weren't, as uh, integrated into their communities as we are. Why do we feel safe? They were the same as we are, and this happened to them. I never thought that I would see this idea come true in my lifetime. But right now, I think anybody who expresses sympathy for the Palestinian point of view, and is not, you can tell them this. You can tell them they're not supporting the Palestinians by supporting Hamas. Hamas is the biggest murderer of Palestinians in the world. What they turned Gaza into was a concentration camp. You listen online to what the Gazans say about what their life was like in Gaza under Hamas, who stole their money, who stole their jobs, who stole their future, who taught their children to be murderers and got them killed. So if they want to support Hamas, then they are not only are they rabid anti-Semites who wish to see the Jewish people annihilated in a new Holocaust, because that is what Hamas stands for, but they are anti-Palestinian because they are supporting the people who are oppressing the Palestinians. So,
And anti-democracy. At the end of the day, anti-democracy as well, I think.
well, you're dealing with the new Nazis. So I guess at the time of Hitler, I read historically, there were Jews who supported Hitler. They thought that if they showed they were interested in supporting his agenda, they would be considered a good Jew and he wouldn't hurt them. Well, we all see how that worked out. So if anybody thinks he's going to be a good Jew and Hamas isn't coming after them, just tell them that the people who were murdered in the kibbutzim, some of them were involved in transporting Palestinians from Gaza to hospitals. They waited at the border with cars to take them up and back. They were involved in peace movements. There was no distinction made. When they came into the kibbutzim with their RPGs and their machine guns, they killed everybody. They are raised to believe that it is a religious duty to make the Jews disappear and to annihilate every Jew in the world. This is a very hard thing for most people to swallow, but I think if you read Barry Weiss, has a very interesting column about this. If you look her up, she just gave a speech to the Federalist Society. Look up Barry Weiss Federalist Society. She makes you understand that we are in a fight for our civilization. This is not a fight between the Arabs and the Jews. This is a fight for our civilization, for all the values we hold dear, for civilization against barbarians. And if we give up that fight, then we become barbarians and we are murdered by barbarians. So anybody who is on their side, you say to them, look, you have to take a choice now. Are you a civilized person or are you a barbarian? Because you can't be both. If you are against the Jewish people now, you're a barbarian, because that is the enemy of the Jews right now. And if you join them, then you are a barbarian, not a civilized person. Maybe that will help. I don't know, but there are so many people that are so insensitive and stupid and don't know history. I don't know how our civilization is going to survive if we don't round up enough people to stand up and be counted at this time. This is a defining moment in human history. And if anybody thinks wherever they live in the world, that they're not involved in this, that it's not going to come to them, that it doesn't affect their lives, it's not going to be part of their lives, they're making a huge mistake. The same mistake that Israel made when they thought they were living next door to people who you could be friends with, they didn't have to love you, but you could live peaceably next to each other. You could help them with their electricity. You could bring them to your hospitals if they were sick. You would be civilized with each other. You would be separate but civilized. If anybody thinks that's what's going to happen, then you're going to be just as surprised as the Israelis were when they break down that fence and they knock on your door and they draw swastikas on your door and they come in with their weapons and they murder you. So I suggest very strongly that if you have people like that, that you do your best to educate them. That's all I can say.
And organizations here, like organizations.
But this is the situation.
We have a lot of there's a lot of stuff from APAC, from Stand With Us, and some other organizations that are trying to feed out to people the truth of what's going on with Hamas, what they're doing, and how they've exploited the people of Gaza. I just want you to know, Naomi, that here in our community, we are praying for Israel. We are not only praying for Israel, but we've supported Israel. We've sent tons and tons of boxes to the fronts. It's in our minds and in our hearts every minute of every day. So we think of Israel and all of you every single day. So we'll continue to do that.
I hope all of you will participate in this by getting online and forwarding posts of the truth. That's what happens. You will not get it from the mainstream media, who every time they post something about everything that comes from Hamas is told to you. This is what Israel did, and everything Israel says is Israel says this is what they did. So
Yeah.
it's always qualified. Whatever it says is always qualified, and whatever Hamas says is accepted, even though they're proven to be liars again and again. Get on the internet, become active, try to spread the truth. Everyone can do that, and be very careful in your neighborhood and in your organizations. Who is being mealy-mouthed about this? Who is saying yes, but about this? There's no yes, but. You're either on the side of civilization or you're on the side of barbarians. And you're lucky that you're Jews, because you get a heads up to be on the side of good and the side of civilization, because that's who Jews are. And you have to lead the way in your own community, in your own families. You have to lead the way, even if it's difficult. And just as I said in my book, these are not things that people like to talk about. People want to say, oh, it happened so long ago, why can't we all just be friends? You can't do that. Because if you want a world worth living in for your children and grandchildren, you have to fight for it. It's not going to be given to you on a silver platter. So I wish you all well. I wish us all well, and see the end of this. And we should all be united in a world where there is no Hamas, and people recognize evil when they see it.